Hi, this is Annette Ross, host of Common Ground on the Sylvia Global Media Network. Today it's an honor and privilege to have with me Jamie Bechtel, who's the co-founder and CEO of New Course. Jamie's a highly regarded leader in international conservation. Jamie, thank you for being here.
Oh, thank you for having me.
I just wanted to get started as background for people that maybe don't know what international conservation even is. What is international conservation and how did you get started in it?
Sure. So international conservation is sort of a movement that emerged, I guess, in the late 70s, early 80s, with the idea that a lot of countries overseas don't have the capacity, they don't have the government in place, they don't have the awareness to protect their habitats, to protect their endangered species. And so organizations establish themselves to work overseas and really look at protecting natural spaces. And originally it was really the protection of natural spaces for the environment. There was not a human link per se. And that movement, that effort went on throughout the 80s and 90s and into recent years. And more recently, we've been seeing a shift and understanding that unless we help people, unless people benefit from environmental efforts, then the work is not going to be sustainable in the long run. In other words, if your kid is hungry, you would go and hunt in the forest, and that's what people do. And it happens that we hunt deer and they hunt primates or gorillas or orangutans or lions or whatever it is. And so it's very similar priorities for people, but we're just now recognizing that those priorities are mission critical. I became interested in this. I really don't know how. I mean, ever since I was a little girl, I wanted to work specifically in marine conservation, and that's what I did up until 5 years ago when I left my job to start New Course.
And what is New Course?
So New Course is an organization, a very small organization, but what happened was I was working on a very large project. It was in 7 countries, and we wanted to scale that up. We wanted to quadruple it in size. And I realized that I should do some research and make sure the reasons, what we were going to invest in were the things we should be investing in, because we were going to spend a lot of money, over $100 million, and we were going to spend a lot of time. And so I went back to the books and I started looking at what's working, where, and why is it working. And I came to understand that the failure to engage all people, all sectors within a society or a community had unintended consequences. So think about it this way. If somebody knocked on your door and asked, one member of the household what their concerns were, it might be very different than, say, the mother of the household. Who's in charge of the kids and the education, and so we kind of do that on a grander scale as it's a process called community engagement or stakeholder awareness. There's all kinds of buzzwords, but really it really means is you go into a community and you talk to people and find out what their hopes, their dreams, what they need to know about their environment. But in doing that, we meaning the collective practitioners, really met with those who greeted us, who met with us, who showed up at the meetings. And it turned out most of those people were men. They were leaders from the community. It was a completely natural way for this process to emerge. And they represented their views, not necessarily the views of the people in their entirety. So recognizing this shortcoming in our system, my husband and I decided to co-found New Course to address the groups of people, the biggest of which is women, although we are increasingly looking at youth activities, to make sure that they're systematically engaged in the process, to make sure that they have a voice at the table, that they are engaged in the work, and that they accrue benefits from the efforts as projects come to fruition. So we wanted to make sure that everybody was there representing their views, and that the result of that is the old way of doing things can actually drive up poverty. Let's say you meet in a village, you say, yeah, we're going to set aside these forests, and the women aren't there to say, hey, that's where we get firewood from, that's where we get medicine for the kids from, that's where we hunt for food to augment, our gardens. And so all of a sudden, the one resource that women and children had is taken away from them. And we see this again and again and again. So so New Course was founded 5 years ago to sort of solve this problem, or help to.
Something that you said in a talk that I heard was if you've been in communities even where there was, let's say, plenty of fish, but the fish in the wrong hands.
Yes, so it's kind of an interesting phenomena, and it's actually something I was guilty of until very recently, and that's the idea of, in order to raise funds for environmental work, you have to demonstrate that it's a priority. And because I worked in marine systems, the obvious thing is that more fish is more food, right? Mm-hmm. So there's a justification for returning these fisheries. Now, I absolutely believe fisheries need to be enhanced. There's a lot of work in marine conservation to be done, but more fish does not necessarily equal more food, and there are plenty of examples. The best documented is from Lake Victoria, but where fish biomass, the number of fish in the lake was at its peak in recent history, but yet malnutrition rates among children were also at their peak. So it's completely counterintuitive. And what was actually happening was that men would fish the big Nile perch and sell those fish on the international markets. Well, when the international markets got shut down for safety concerns because of fish contamination, the men stopped fishing. The women, when these markets were intact, had jobs surrounding the fisheries. So maybe they would smoke the remnants of the fish, the heads and the tails, for food and snacks. Maybe they would collect firewood to run the burners that smoked the fish. Maybe they sold beer and refreshments to the fishermen. They had all kinds of small jobs. And so when the fishery shut down, those women were put out of work. Well, it was the income from the women's job that went to buy the food for the children. So when we're looking at these issues, we really have to look at not only the community dynamics, but the household dynamics.
Is that sort of when you decided, or why you decided to incorporate more women? Because women were not as engaged earlier on, right?
So that particular example is one that we fleshed out after New Course was started, but there are others similar. The one that was most influential to me and led to the start of New Course was very similar. Again, it was in fishing villages, but when those women ran out of jobs, they began to sell fish. Let me explain it this way. Women in fishing communities are the poorest of the poor. They are often illiterate because these are very marginal communities. They don't have a lot of alternative jobs. They're often very remote communities. And so what would happen is, as the fishery collapsed and fish became more scarce, the job opportunities for women became more scarce. So they would start relationships with fishermen. And it's effectively trading sex for fish. So you would find a boyfriend, he would be a fisherman, he would sell you his fish first. But as the fishery continued to collapse, that dynamic and that power structure shifted. So you went from maybe 6 of these mama karanges, who are the fish purchasers. That's the name for them in Tanzania. So maybe you used to have 6 mama karanges in a village, but now you have 150 mama karanjes. So the fishermen are now saying, no, you won't get my fish unless you sleep with me. It becomes a different power dynamic. And so that ends up driving up the rate of HIV and poverty among women. And so in fishing communities around the world, it turns out that where fisheries have collapsed, they are among the hottest hotspots for HIV, more so than trucking communities, mining communities, drug use communities. And so here I was, I'd been working in 30 countries for 20 years. I had no idea that HIV was that these areas were hotspots for HIV. I had never made the connection between the lives of the people, especially the women, and the collapse of the fisheries. Likewise, villages where fisheries collapse are places where girls get trafficked to pay off family debts. There's all kinds of poverty, results of poverty that occur in these fishing communities.
That is heartbreaking to even hear about. But when you're talking, first of all, how do you communicate with these women? Can you speak the different languages, or where are you mostly in Africa?
So we're a global organization. Most of our pilot sites, we call them our R&D, where we test drive new models, new ways of doing things with partners. Most of those sites are in Africa, but we also have some work in Latin America and South America, the Caribbean. We work in, we have worked in the South Pacific, and our portfolio is intended to be global. But it just happens that right now most of our funding is for Africa. The second part of what we do, though, I should add, is we take this information and we move it up into the big international organizations, whether they're for-profit corporations, whether they're foundations, or whether they're bigger NGOs. And we try and work with and educate and inform those groups so that they can change the way that they do their business. And so the idea is, at the end of the day, we want everyone to steal our idea. We want everyone to be integrating women into their practice. And I was very excited to learn that the UN had an environmental assembly in Africa 3 weeks ago, and gender, the links between women and the environment, was at the top of the agenda. There was a lot of attention given to this. So where we as a community have come, and hopefully the voice of New Course has added to that momentum, but there's a lot more recognition now that, wait a minute, women are actually really important people.
Really important. Yeah. And good for you, by the way, because I think that's going to keep you going by sort of partnering up and sharing with all of these other, with, like you said, not-for-profit or for-profit, whatever it may be. But when you're on the ground and you're seeing what a different culture you're involved in, how do you express to them, or maybe invoke change a little bit? That must be hard because it's sort of what they're used to, right?
Actually, no. Yes and no. A lot of communities, we have this notion, and I get asked this question a lot, aren't you worried you're going to disrupt cultures? Well, cultures are not static conditions. They change, and actually right now, many are changing very rapidly, some for better, some for worse. We're losing a lot of the cultural diversity that we had, but there are shifting norms. And there have been some great studies recently, one by the Rockefeller Foundation, that shows that in part because of primary education emphasis, those norms are changing very rapidly right now. And so that's the good news. There are examples like from Botswana where 20, 30 years ago, women were actually quite vocal in their communities. They had a lot of authority in their communities. But as their poverty went up, their authority went down. So returning, their voice is something that it's still within the generations. People still remember when women were more prominent in decision making. So these are not sort of static situations. I think the reason that we've been most successful is that when we founded New Course, we had several principles that were written right away. We knew exactly what needed to happen, and probably the biggest is humility and humbleness. And we never show up into a village saying, this is what you have to do. We always show up, and sadly, it's an innovation. We show up and we ask, what do you need to better manage your resources? And we make sure that we ask that question of women. It may take a little time because we might have to meet with men to eventually get the authority to meet with women, but we always make sure that we understand what the women need, what the men need to make their world a better place, their local communities a better place, what their dreams are, what their hopes are. And just by asking that, we are eons ahead of many other organizations, because the way our system is set up is you raise money from a donor, you say, we're going to do this, and then you go in and you do it. So let's say you say, we're going to set up protected areas. Well, you have to now go in and set up protected areas. We've kind of flipped that process over, and we start with the people. A lot of times they're exactly what we would hope that they would want to invest in. But I use myself as an example. If somebody showed up at my door and said, you have to grow 5,000 trees in your backyard, I would sort of look at them and say, in my spare time, I've got 2 kids, I've got a job, I've got bills to pay, I don't have time to plant 5,000 trees. But if somebody came to me and sat down and said, what do you need to be able to do this? That's an entirely different conversation. And so what we found, in some places we do speak the language, but frankly, it doesn't matter. You're a white person from Western world showing up. So we always work through translators. We always work through local respected individuals, men, women, elderly, sometimes the youth, and they become our vehicle for communication.
What is your hope? Is your hope for them to take them out of poverty, just to make their lives a little better, to help them? Can you give me sort of an example from one of the communities of like how it sort of happened on the ground?
Sure. It's funny. I've had to adjust my vision of what I want to happen. What you want to happen is there to be no more poverty, no more disease, no more girls sold into marriage. That's what you hope for. And a lot of times these things happen. But sometimes, I heard an interview recently for another phenomenal organization, water.org. And the little girl who now could go to school and didn't have to carry water, it freed up 4 hours of her day. And it was actually an interview by Matt Damon. And he asked her, well, what are you going to do? Are you going to study now that you have all this extra time? And she said, no, I'm going to play. She said, I don't need to study. I'm the best in my class. I'm going to play. And, how great is it that a kid can play? Likewise, I've now said, we're distributing lights. We work with a company called Empowered. They have these little solar lights. We love them. We use them. So we don't just give them to women, which is a common scenario. We give them to women after meeting with them about household savings. So when you give a woman a light that is a solar light, not only does it create a cleaner living environment. Kerosene is ridiculously dangerous. Indoor air pollution is astounding. So it eliminates all of those costs and burdens on the family, and it allows women to work later in the evening on projects or small businesses. But it also generates it ranges obviously, but as much as we've worked in communities where it generates a 25% savings in income. So women don't have to use that money for kerosene. They can now save the money. But if you just free up money in the household and you don't understand where that money goes, it could easily leak out of the household. So we worked with the women to create.
Hold your thought there 1 second because I want you to finish, but just to give people perspective and even me, what do you think, what's their budget, would you say, when you say money leaving the household? What kind of money, what would someone make in a year there or have to use for their household for a year?
So good question. We generally work in ultra poor households, so less than $1 a day, and women, that's per household, and women are generally less than that.
Okay.
So 25% of their income might be $13, or I'm sorry, $6 a month, $7 a month.
Okay.
But it varies from place to place. But most places that we work in are less than $1 a day income. So these women now are able to save up, and when they aggregate those funds, when you have 10, 15 households, that's quite a bit of money, and they can then begin loaning to each other small businesses. So for us, change looks like, the analogy I use is our communities, our environmental community and our poverty alleviation community are still inventing phones. And we need to start inventing smartphones. Smartphones solve many problems at the same time. It's got your bank, it's got your GPS, it's got your telephone on it. And so these lights could be a light, but they're actually a savings unit. They're actually a small business investment. They're actually a health investment. So, we try and find these solutions that solve multiple problems at the same time, and then we go out and we talk about them and tell people about the successes.
So so would that be happening in several of the different communities you're working in at once, where this is one tool that you're bringing in, you sort of the lights, or are they all sort of having the similar problems, Jamie?
Yeah, 95% of the time, I would say 95% of the time, it all boils down to the same problems, and frankly, probably to one, which is women, small business opportunities, the ability to generate some sort of revenue so that they have choices to make. so that they can send their girls to school. We see that a lot. As soon as women make a little bit of money, they can afford school fees, they can send their girls to school, they can pay for help on their farm. They have choices to make. They can make more sustainable options because they're not pressed for time all the time. So if I had to drill it down, I would say small business opportunities for women. And we've seen a lot of emphasis on girls' education. I think that's phenomenal. I think that's a major piece. But we have to then create something for them to do once they have that education.
Right.
So, yeah.
What do they do and where do they go? Will you tell the story about the family you became personally involved? Is it Dito? Was that her name?
Dodo. Yeah.
Because I think that was a very touching and poignant story, and I just think I would love for you to share it.
Sure. So Dodo is one of my favorite people in the world. She would attend our workshops or our stakeholder engagement, where we were talking to people about what their needs were. And she invited us. She always had a gleam in her eye. You could tell there was a little mischief there, and just beautiful. I'll never forget her eyes. And so she invited us back to her house, and it turns out her husband was very actively engaged in sustainable agriculture. He very much cared about the environment. He understood that, we need to look at the long term, which is actually a view that tends to be held more by women than men. But Dodo's husband did understand this and invested a lot of time and energy. However, he had diabetes that went untreated, and it resulted in blindness. So he is now blind and they have 4 children, all of whom Dodo is supporting, as well as her in-laws. So Dodo has a daughter who is among the 5% of kids who walk. She walks about 3 kilometers each way to school. So 5% of the kids in these communities go to secondary school, and her daughter had made it and was every day waking up, going back and forth. So we decided to invest personally, outside of our organization, to invest in Dodo's daughter. And we told the family through our partners that we would pay for her fees, which are about $100 a year, and then we would double that at the end of every year that her daughter finished. So a great investment. We've seen the data, we did the research, we knew this was a very smart move. And I called at the end of the school year to find out where I could send my money, and our project officer said, "You can't send the money, she dropped out of school." And I was just, flabbergasted by this, and I thought, how is that even possible? That's just the most ridiculous financial move ever. And they said, well, the costs come in and the bills come in, and it doesn't necessarily come in when the money comes in. And so you make what decisions you can, and their daughter was forced into marriage to use the money from the dowry to pay for bills. And so, it was a great lesson for us, and we've since spent a lot of time thinking about this, that a lot of the job opportunities we create, the crops, not that we create, but that are created, the crops that are encouraged, they come to fruition once a year. And again, I use myself as an example. I get paid once a month, and if you want to go out to dinner with me at the end of the month, we're going to, because I can't afford, and then come August 2nd, I'll take you out to dinner. I have all the money in the world because I just got paid. And so we all have this sort of typical habit or, issue in our finances. And it just happens that when you're very poor, the decisions you have to make are much more dire than those that most of us have to make. So yeah, it was a pretty heartbreaking scenario.
That is heartbreaking. When you are going into these situations where the problems are sort of overwhelming, like even her husband and not being able to receive the medical care for diabetes, which if you're on top of it, hopefully diabetes so is a devastating disease, but my father's also had it for a long time, and has been able to keep his feet intact and his eyes, because of the care. When you see all of these different issues like the education and also the health care, is that overwhelming? I feel like just to start to one thing at a time, I feel like that would be overwhelming to see in person, up front and close.
So yes, no. I mean, I think the interesting thing is that when you go into the communities, these women are, and these people are amazing. I mean, they are proud, they are happy, there is singing, there are, I always laugh when I see the children crying pictures because we were there with one of our board members who's a photographer, and the kids were running around laughing. And when the camera came up with this humongous lens, they started crying because they were afraid of the camera. You know, but there was not a tear shed in that community for the whole time we were there until the camera came out. So these are not, most of the time, these are not.
They're joyful people?
They're joyful people. I mean, they will say to you, I'm doing I mean, there's pride in that, right? I am doing the best I can by my children, by my family. They are hardworking women, and they're proud women. And that is, I think the exciting thing is we have never given them the opportunity. If you go back and you look at aid and development, it has always focused on a principle of trickle down. It has never gone directly it's gone often to governments, mostly male-led. It has gone, through corruption lenses. It's gone, but when you give a woman an opportunity, all hell breaks loose. All great things happen. And that is just echoed and reiterated throughout the community. And so, you can choose to be devastated by it, or you can see it from their perspective. And every time they break into song, we have a video that we got for the lights. In every village, my husband would end up dancing with women and singing because they were so excited about the opportunity. Having said that, we have recently started working in refugee camps, and that's pretty tough. That's
Syria? The people that are being displaced out of Syria, which refugee camps? Oh, Sudan or?
No, in the Democratic Republic of Congo, in Eastern Congo, which is a very, very tough place to work. And then there are still some displaced persons camps in Uganda that are just now starting to be repatriated to their communities, and trying to understand, here you have a generation of young people that have grown up on aid, and it has completely changed their perspective of the world, not necessarily for the best. So how do you rebuild a country that, this is the area where Kony's rebellion was basically seeded, and girls returning who have been held as slaves. And so really tough, I think a little bit tougher than our day-to-day jobs right now. But yeah, refugees are difficult.
How has the aid changed their perspective?
Well, you have 10 years of handouts, essentially. So we spoke with one woman in Uganda who actually had land, which is tough because there's all kinds of land tenure crises. So she actually had land, but her sons refused to work it because they just assumed that there would be another handout. And so now, as the region is stabilized and the other governments are pulling out their aid, there's very little done to transition these young people into their old livelihoods. So trying to do a better job of interventions in natural disaster crises, war and conflict.
Yes.
I think we have a lot of work to do in that space.
And in the Congo, isn't that still quite dangerous?
Yeah, it's okay right now. It's calmed down. One of the last major militias has been dismantled. There's still flares, but we're not seeing the same thing we were the past few years. But it's, it is unstable in the sense that you have a lot of very poor people who don't have opportunities, a huge amount of environmental degradation, very lawless. It is, in terms of the war, it is a little more stable than 5 years ago.
So what do you actually do, Jamie? You just get your people with New Course on the ground out to these areas. You go yourself? Does your husband go?
It varies. My husband is our chief program officer, so he tends to spend more time on the ground. So what we do, we always work through a local partner, one that's been there usually for a long time and has a lot of respect. So we go in and we look at their strategy and the work that they're doing, and we figure out how can we tweak this to get a better return on their investment, so that they maybe get more protected areas, or they get women who are more respectful of the protected areas. You know, there's a protected area park in South Africa, and something like 93% of the women use it illegally because they don't have other options for fuel or for food. Or maybe, you know, our favorites are when we have environmental organizations that suddenly are doing HPV vaccines or are investing in clean energy sources, and they don't see the connection initially, they don't make the connection on the ground, but we're able to sort of show them, you know what, when the village is healthier, they're more willing to invest and more able to invest in tree planting or sustainable agriculture or agroforestry. So, you know, what are the other tools that should be part of the environmental portfolio that aren't? We're working on a grass seed project where women are getting jobs and they're generating grass seeds so that the rangelands in Kenya can be rehabilitated so that the cattle can feed. And when farmers, that is, to me, is crazy, but it's so intuitive. When farmers are able to grow cattle, which is the basis of Maasai community, they don't poach elephants. So if you want to eliminate elephant poaching,
an elephant, right?
Yeah, give people a job. They would much rather, you know, or give them compensation when the elephant stomps the crops that have been growing. You know, make sure that these families are taken care of. So, you know, you never. I think 5 years ago, people wouldn't have equated women's small businesses with anti-elephant poaching efforts, but they very much related.
So what is your life like? I mean, do you love this work? I mean, it sounds to me, it is so impressive what you're doing. Because I'd be the first one who would say, save an elephant. And then I would like be, how does that actually happen? Or what is actually happening? I mean, I'm so completely out of touch, but you're right. Would I also, in a situation, let an elephant go to save my family? Sure, I probably would. There's a lot of things that I would do if I thought my kids needed food. A lot of things I might not do if I thought my kids had food. Do you know what I mean? You're right. It's so intuitive. It's absolutely the way it is. So your daily life, so you're partnering up with people that maybe are already there and doing things. You're seeing what they're doing. And you and your hubby are doing this together, which I think is so cool. And how many people are at New Course, working at New Course with you?
So we have, it's a lot of questions, but so
no, I'm sorry, that was a lot.
No, it's good. I think I've got them all. So there's 4 of us. We have a woman in Uganda, and then a program officer who's out. Poor man has not been home in months now. He keeps emailing saying, "Can I come home?" And we say, "No, one more meeting." And then, but we'll see him again soon. He's wonderful. We have an advisory board. We have a executive board, and then we have researchers. Depending upon the type of project we're working on, we have as many as 12 researchers that we pull in to gather this information and talk about it. I go into the field from time to time, in part to check up on our work, to make sure we both agreed that we didn't want to do this because we thought we should. We wanted to do it because we were actually making a difference. And frankly, I run a nonprofit. If I'm not making a difference, I would just as soon go make money somewhere and take a vacation. And so we wanted to make sure what we were doing had impact. And so I go up to check on those things, and then to be able to understand what's working, what's not, to be able to tell the stories more effectively, so that when we're working with the big corporations, we can speak to the heart. For a long time, my husband did spend a lot of time overseas, and that was pretty tough. We have 2 little kids, so that distance was very difficult. But it's getting easier. It's like any startup. Everything we have, because we believe so profoundly in the possibilities. So we're 5 years up, and we're starting to we're stabilized, and that's taken a lot of pressure, off of us, that we don't need to prove that the model works anymore. We just now need to go out and make, bigger impact, have a bigger impact in the world. So that's very exciting for us. We've created a brand or a product that people like and are using, and that's very, very exciting and rewarding for us. And then I forgot the last part of the question.
No, but has it been relatively easy for you to find a good donor base or people to support your work?
Yes, I think, a lot of donors want to see the exact change on the ground. So give a woman a light, and what does her family look like, and how does light change things? And so sometimes it's harder to communicate the bigger picture. It's a little bit more complicated than that. So, we're not building wells for people per se. We do sometimes provide water as part of this bigger picture. But yes, we're funded by foundations. We work closely with amazing groups. We're advisors to the Clinton Global Initiative. We've worked with the major foundations, and then we are supported by citizen philanthropy and donors. And the exciting thing for me is that I left an organization that was very good at raising hundreds of millions of dollars. And I think when you're in that model, it's a wonderful model, you can do big things, but you sometimes lose the value of $25. And at New Course, we can take $25 and change a life. We can change a household. In fact, we're trying to figure out if we can do that with $10 light investments. Can a $10 light investment transform a household over the course of 4 years? So we're exploring that, and I think that's exciting for people to hear that. We're very frugal, we're very rigorous in our accounting, and we're very interested in what does difference make? What does small investment make versus large investment make? We are open to all of those ideas and questions. So yeah, we're funded by a variety of sources.
Because one of the things, I met this guy from India. He was from a rural community in India, and an organization, and I don't want to name it because that's really not the point, but one of the bigger organizations had come in there, and it was a water issue I recall him talking about, but they weren't listening, and that was the big thing. He felt, or the community felt from how he explained it to me, that they were being told what to do, and also that it wasn't really what they actually needed.
Exactly.
What I'm hearing from you is the exact opposite. You're looking at their culture, but like you said, that's not a static thing, but you're asking them, what would you like to see change? Which, when you come in and you're partnering up, as you said, with some people that might already be there, when you come in, do they already know that you're mostly interested in a certain thing? Or if it was medical, if they felt what they mostly needed was medical, can you address that, or would that be not something you can address?
No, that's our whole point is, so our whole point is that environmental work needs to be about development work, needs to be about health, needs to be about small businesses, it needs to be about education, it needs to be about safety. And likewise, safety, environmental work, or safety, healthcare, and I'll give you a great example. All of those things are also about the environment. And so I was recently in a non-communicable disease meeting, and many executives from big organizations working on non-communicable diseases, and they were talking about their priorities, and tobacco was one of their priorities, not mentioned in their top 5 list, because more and more people are smoking. What was not mentioned in that list was indoor air pollution, and 3 billion people use biomass for cooking. So that can be wood, that can be dung, that can be grass, but all of those things have smoke. And these women are cooking with their children in these, huts made of various materials, none of which have ventilation. And so the rate of disease from indoor air pollution trumps tobacco by a long shot, but yet the health community isn't thinking about that. But the reason we're thinking about that is not only because of the health burden, but that all of those things have a very severe impact on the environment. Deforestation, for the collection of wood, and so or charcoal, which is a huge issue in so many places, particularly the Eastern Congo, Kenya, where people go off and they make charcoal and they either sell it or they use it for their own cooking purposes. And so if you're working on health and you're excluding indoor air pollution, you're missing a huge part of the puzzle. So we try and work on both sides of this fence and make those connections. And so yes, we absolutely, we will ask women. We were in one village in Tanzania, and I've said this many times. We were the first organization in 25 years of engagement with this community to ask the women what their health concerns were. And they said, we've been told HIV is a problem, we have been told malaria is a problem, but we're afraid of cervical cancer. Well, it turns out Tanzania has one of the highest rates of cervical cancer in the world. It's like number 2 or number 3. But nobody had ever asked them. And so we began the process that we're still working on to try and get HPV vaccines to these communities. And once, you know, women share their stories and you listen and you respond to them, then they become lifelong environmentalists. So they know that you care about them as people and them as mothers and wives and daughters. And so then they care and are more able to engage with you on what you care about. So the relationship building.
As human beings, though, they feel like their life then, that you think that their life has some sort of value. And then I feel like that makes perfect sense to me. What was just curiosity? What was the reason the incidence of cervical cancer was so high?
You know, I don't know. I think, you know, many of the same reasons, bargaining power and unprotected sex, but my hunch is that there's also some policies in place that are well-intended and have helped stabilize Tanzania, but that have resulted in a lot of cross-tribal marriages, which has been great for the country. But I think it may also have other consequences. So I don't know the exact reason. And these are pretty remote villages that we're working in. So I'm sure once, you know, a disease like HPV gets in there, it kind of, you know, the space.
And how about like the cooking and the smoke? How would you address that?
So, you know, this is another great example of, so we're working right now with these lights, and the idea, we're just launching a project where we take these little lights that generate savings in the house, and we're seeing if we can incentivize the savings to be moved to a second green energy purchase, such as a cook stove. We know that once a household adopts a clean cook stove and a light, the rate of, so if you measure community health care centers, 80% of what they see stems from indoor air pollution usually. You can reduce that to 2% in 3 months' time. So what we're trying to do is understand, why do people make the decisions that they make, and how can we help them you know, make more of those decisions. So again, the example that I use is, if somebody said to me, you need to put solar panels on your house, I can't afford solar panels. But if somebody said to me, we'll put solar panels on your house, and we want you to take that savings to buy a Prius, I would totally do that in a heartbeat. That's a very smart investment. So trying to look at, you know, why do we think ultra-poor people are incentivized by something other than what ultra-rich people are? They care about taking care of their families, yes. They care about their well-being, and they care about what people think, and they care about their standing in the community, and they care about being good people. And so why not look at it more from their perspective than from our perceptions of what they care about?
I totally agree with you. So you're saying that maybe then they would take that savings and invest in a cook stove? How much is a cook stove, just out of curiosity?
You know, it varies. But there are some that can be locally made very cheaply, so $5, $10, with a chimney maybe $12. What we're trying to understand, there have been some studies that suggest that depending upon how you make them, it may or may not change the indoor air pollution. It may just make it harder to detect. So the fires burn hotter so that the soot is smaller so that you don't see it, and it goes further into the lungs. So we're trying to make sure that I don't think right now the models of very high-end cook stoves make a lot of sense, because many people can't afford them. But they can be $50, $60, $70, $100. But they can also be mud stoves with draft protection and that sort of thing. So it's a whole range, and that's kind of the big issue in the community right now. Is one of the things we're trying to grapple with is giving these people choices. Again, you know, if you're given this light, it might not be the right light for you, and we'd like to have diversity in our purchases. So different models, different community members, we're trying to figure out how to make that happen.
Well, you know what you should go to the south side of Chicago, because you know what I'm most impressed with? It's just the way that you think. And that's part of the thing that people, I don't think, when they're trying to come in and solve a problem or try to help other people, they don't maybe understand that, like, when I think of where I grew up on the south side, people were there just trying to survive. And then why did they get involved in drugs? Well, because they were trying to survive. And they thought that was the way to make money, because they're trying to survive. I mean, they don't really, it's not their, they do want to be good people. They want to be good citizens. They want better for their children. But if that was the only way that I could survive to help my children, I probably would do it. I mean, if I was really jammed into a corner, even though I consider myself an incredibly moral person, you are providing choices and options, and you're really thinking it through from as best you can from their perspective and from listening.
Right, right. No, I mean, this is exactly it. When we think of child marriage, you know, I mean, or the better example is probably prostitution. This example that I explained earlier on, where fish are or sex is traded for fish, that got dubbed as prostitution in many of the and much of the literature. And as soon as that word prostitution comes into play, there's very much a judgment there. Well, that's not, and that's relationship building. That's, you know, you have a boyfriend and he does nice things for you. And so I think we have to be very careful about the words that we use and the judgments that are behind those words. And, you know, Seattle has a great example where the police stopped referring to pimps as pimps and started referring to them as human traffickers. And that changed the perception of the policemen. They understood the problem of runaways being forced into sex as a very different scenario than prostitution, and it helped with enforcement. And so I think the way, you know, we have to be careful not to judge. And, you know, coming back to the question you asked me earlier about what do you envision for these people, I love asking women what their dreams are. They all have dreams, and some of them are just so amazing, and some of them are very simple. One woman I talked to in Tanzania, you know, no electricity. They were years away from electricity, and she said, I just want to sit in front of the TV and knit. And I thought, of course, she wanted to, you know, knit scarves to sell and watch TV. And I think often, if nothing else, if New Course is ultimately a humongous failure, I will know that thousands of women had the opportunity to sit down and put their feet up for a few minutes. That they had that choice, you know, that they weren't walking for water every day, they weren't struggling to put lighting in their house, that they could, you know, sit and talk and just relax for a minute. And maybe that's okay. I would love for the impact to be more in our terms, you know, why people give money, but giving women choices, I think, is a very valuable contribution.
It is. I'm going to close it there because that was so beautifully said. And I think you're incredible. I've been looking forward to our conversation for probably a month now, and then in that time was able to learn more about you and see a few things that you have done in terms of, like, watching you on a couple talks that you gave. And you seem like a beautiful person to me. And if you did that even for one person, you know, that she could put her feet up and knit, I mean, to me, you gave someone their dream. Who can say that? I mean, that's incredible. And I love New Course. I'm glad I'm going to get it out there. So I want to thank you for being here.
Well, thank you so much. And obviously, it's very much a passion of mine to talk about these things. So thanks for letting me do that.
Thank you, Jamie Bechtel, CEO of New Course, and thank you, Sylvia Global, Gail Sylvia, and Sylvia Global Media Network. We'll see you again soon. Have a great week, Jamie.
Great, thank you.
Thanks.